have done about it?
This thing, I got to noticing its eyes. Its eyes was real evil, real sinister looking. You know, the look it was giving me.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Gio!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Welcome to Bigfoot Hotspot Radio, Sasquatch Chronicles. I'm your host, Wes, along with my brother Woody, and researcher, author, and friend, William Jevney. Let's start the show. My girlfriend's daughter's been sick, and she's like 10 years old, and she doesn't understand that you cover your mouth when you cough.
Oh.
And she had this terrible cough, and like, I got back from the Browns this morning, slept for like 3 or 4 hours, and then woke up with just this nasty cough. It's killing me.
Uh-oh.
You got it.
Yeah, good times. Now, where do you want to start with the Browns, Shannon? Should we start with light? Or do we want to talk about the light?
Here's the deal. The light. Oh my gosh. Did you tell Will about that or?
Yeah, I told him the story.
Yeah. I talked to John again this morning because he drove me home, and I was like, okay, so let's talk again about the light, or the Bigfoot eye shine, as you want to call it. But I go, what do you prefer? What do you want us to do? And he goes, do I care if you talk about it? No. Would I prefer you didn't? Yeah. They both would prefer we didn't even probably bring it up. That maybe, I mean, we're definitely omitting a huge part of the story, but if that's what they really want, I don't know. What's your feelings on that?
I don't want to cheat our audience on what we saw. I'd rather just be honest and be straightforward and tell them what we saw.
Yeah.
It is what it is. I mean, do I think it's two separate phenomena that's going on? I absolutely do. Yeah, you guys have to forgive me for this cold, but we headed out to, really hadn't heard anything all night long, and we're out at the Browns. So there's this abandoned building on the Browns property, and we start heading out to this abandoned building, and there's two actual abandoned buildings out there. One was probably constructed in the 1800s. It's made of wood, and the other one seems more recent, maybe was made in probably like the 40s or 50s, and it's made of aluminum, and they're right next to each other. Literally, we hadn't heard anything all night long. It's probably, what, Shannon, half a mile?
Yeah, it was a good little walk out there.
So we head out to this abandoned building. We're sitting in this abandoned building. We all have headlamps on. And we're all sitting inside. We're just talking. And rain's coming down and everything. And I look outside this abandoned building, and I see what looks like a headlamp coming towards us. I almost don't want to use the word orb of light, but it was kind of a... and I didn't think orb of light when I first saw it. Like, we were all just sitting there, and I see this thing coming towards us. And my first thought was, well, maybe it's someone out on the tribal land that's coming out that has a headlamp on like we do, and it's coming towards the barn. And you could see this thing bobbing up and down, almost level with us, coming right towards us. So me and Mimi are talking, and I think Shannon and Kirk Brandenburg and John were probably a good, 70 feet in front of us, something like that. They were actually face to face with this thing coming right at us. And I was telling Mimi, I was like, hey, look, I think someone's coming towards the barn. So I just turned my headlamp off, and I'm just waiting for I'm waiting for this person to come up on us. And then the light goes out. What's strange is where the light was at was actually above this huge ravine that dropped down into the forest. And so, I mean, Occam's razor, was it a person? That makes the most sense, but knowing the layout of the land, it doesn't really make sense. So what it was, I couldn't tell you. All I know is this huge beam of light was coming towards us, not like a UFO ship, because my first impression was this is a person with a headlamp on running towards us, and then the light went out. I tell Kirk Brandenburg, I tell him, hey, hit it with the thermal and see what's out there. So he starts scanning with the thermal, and he's like, hey, man, I don't see anything out there. And I'm like, okay, well, that's weird. So me and my girlfriend get up. We walk out of this abandoned building. We walk around it. Now we're in between this old wooden abandoned building and this aluminum abandoned building. And we're standing there. And Shannon and John are walking out of this abandoned building. They're probably like 100 feet behind us. And it had just started raining really heavy. Well, directly in front of us, we hear this whack, whack, whack against this aluminum abandoned building. It startles me because it's really loud. I mean, I was thinking that it was like a baseball bat hitting it, but my girlfriend kind of nailed it when she said it sounded more like an open-fisted palm slapping the side of the building. And I'm turning to her, and I'm just about ready to tell her, don't run. I've told her 100 times, do not run. Whether it's Bigfoot, whether it's a cougar, whether it's any wild animal, do not run. Stand your ground, because you have a better chance of standing your ground, because the moment you run, now you become prey. So as I'm turning to her and I'm about ready to tell her don't run, she's already in a full sprint running back to the group. So I'm standing there by myself, and then it just goes dead quiet.
I remember Kirk just, going back to the light that we saw. He's just like, who's headed towards us? I think that was all our impression, was who's the person out at, 3 in the morning, and it was raining, and it wasn't warm out by any means, as everyone can imagine. Yeah, the light was, it was a bright light. I didn't get any odd feelings about it. I didn't think, oh yeah, finally I get to see a UFO this weekend too. It wasn't an impression like that I got. It was fast. It seemed like it was moving pretty fast. And just like you described, Wes, it just kind of was there, and then it just wasn't there. Whether that was a person ducking down or going behind a tree or whatever that may have been, it was a little odd. And then, the incident with, once we exited the building to leave, you and Mimi were the only two to hear that, the other building, the aluminum building, being slapped. I don't know how we didn't hear it. There might have been a little rain going on, and I think John and I were probably chatting about the light, but we didn't hear it. We just noticed Mimi coming back for some reason, and she looked very concerned, and that's when she said, something just hit that building. And she said, and she just had these wide eyes. She's like, it went bam, bam, bam. And me and John were like, what in the world? Both incidents were odd and notable, noteworthy. I think they're separate things. It definitely could have been a person in the field. The headlamp, it looked like a headlamp. It looked just probably like one of our headlamps would have looked if we were on that side of the ravine, to be honest with you. A very interesting night. Whatever that was, slapping the building was very close to us. And the other unfortunate thing to that is that Kirk Brandenburg, he didn't hear the slap on the building either. So he didn't, I think we all just assumed he had and was therming over there, but he didn't. He may not have seen anything anyway, but yeah, very interesting night. That was the first night on Friday.
Do you want to talk about the thermal that you guys got and talk about what happened?
On Sunday night, I went back over there. It was just me and Sarah and John. It was probably around 11 p.m., maybe 11:30. We heard a huge thud, and John cracked me up because he goes, it was like a body fell out of a tree. And I was like, yeah, pretty much. It was very, very loud, and we could actually feel it hit the ground. And it seemed off to our left. And then within, I would say 30 to 40 minutes, Sarah's scanning with the therm. She goes, yeah, I got a peeker. I have one, and it's not very far. There's a head looking right now. And I go, are you sure? And she says, yes, because it just went down and popped back up. And she's really excited about it. She goes, okay, well, I just got it walking away, whatever it is. It just realized I saw it, and now it just walked away, and I have it on camera. You know, the long and the short of that is we spent Monday most of the day working on trying to find the proper spot where she was standing versus where the subject was, you know, in relation to the bushes, because that will make all the difference between it being an 8-foot subject, you know, and a 5-foot subject. So we, as of right now, had not pinned on that measurement. So as of right now, it's inconclusive. Was it interesting? Yes. It's creepy either way because, you know, there was a person then very, very close just there watching us. So, and one more thing I want to mention about Friday. While we were on our long walkabout in the creepy abandoned building, while my audio recorder was back at their house, I think that I got a really good whoa on tape. Sarah's going to try to work on cleaning that up. It's a kind of audio recorder that won't record unless there's a certain decibel of sound. So we're going to try to get that cleaned up and share with everybody.
Yeah, so Monday night, we go out there. Mimi and I drive out there, and I have this brilliant idea of not necessarily call blasting, because I really didn't have it on the speaker, but I was playing it for my phone. They have this thermal tent set up, you know, where you can sit in there with a thermal and nothing can see you. And I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and play this baby crying and see what happens. As a primate, it would drive me nuts. And so I set up this this audio recording of this baby crying. It's 12 hours on YouTube that you can play, and it's just this constant baby crying. After about an hour and a half, it's driving me nuts. Like I'm going nuts from this kid crying on this audio recording. So I get up to turn it off. As I'm getting up to turn it off, we start getting whoops. And they were kind of off in the distance at first, but they, like all three of us heard this whoop, whoop, and it was whooping towards the auto recording. So I start walking back towards the house, and I'm going to grab the thermal, and I hear something just crash to the brush. I mean, it sounded like a truck just crashed to the brush over there. So I stop and I look over, and Sarah comes out, and she hears it, and like all four of us heard it. And this thing, it went from like a weird whoop into, and it kind of sounded like a female whoop, didn't it, Shannon? It really didn't sound like a male whoop.
Yeah, like right off the bat, I was like, it just sounds, I mean, as feminine as a whoop could sound, it sounded a little feminine. Yeah.
All of us walked back towards the gazebo, and the whoop changed. The whoop went on for probably, what, Shannon, a half hour, 40 minutes?
I was just going to say probably about 40 minutes straight.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, completely straight. And we could hear it in different directions. At first, it was kind of behind us, and then it seemed like it was kind of working its way towards the thermal tent. And the whoop changed into this weird, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, it was still a whoop, but it was very rhythmic. It was very, I don't know. How would you describe it, Shannon?
It almost became like sing-song. It became groups of three, and the first whoop was always the same tone versus the second whoop was also its own tone, and it was a little bit higher. It was awesome. It was exciting, actually. And like Wes said, it did change positions, and I'll let Wes, tell you guys what happened to make it all stop. But by the time it was done, it was probably as far left of the recording as you could, or the thermal tent as you could get. So there is some equipment set up in there, and we're hoping maybe we got something on that stuff.
Yeah. Now what happened is my phone died. And the minute my phone died and that crying stopped, it's like everything went silent. There was no noise at all. I mean, it went dead silent. I tried a different baby call, and I kind of wish I would have gone back to the more distressed call I was using. It's almost like it wasn't quite falling for the second baby call I was using. I tried a distressed deer call. That didn't really do anything. But that first call that I used, It took about an hour and a half, but I mean, things were coming in and checking it out. That's for sure. And we were trying to use a thermal, and the thermal kept dying on us, but we kept trying to use the thermal to scan the area.
In retrospect, when you think about call blasting, it certainly wasn't loud. You know, it was just your phone playing, so that was impressive as well.
But that's pretty much it. What do you think, Will?
I don't know. To be honest, without hearing and experiencing myself, it's really difficult to, put a point on the pencil there.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, when that whoop started up, it startled all three of us. I mean, all three of us were on our tippy toes after that. And it had moved around coming towards us, coming towards that sound. As far as the light goes, I don't know what to tell you about the light. I really don't have an answer for you on that one.
Yeah, it definitely could have just been a Friday night bored kid out there or something. Who knows? It wasn't great weather for it, but it could have, it absolutely could have been that, because it looked like just a single headlamp out there.
Yeah, we got to get you out there, Will.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think, Will? Too much flute playing?
Well, the only thing I think is like, when you're telling the audience something, if there's, without, more investigation, you don't want to give, a lot of maybes and ifs out there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when it comes to investigating Sasquatch, you got to put a lot of that stuff in the back of your mind and keep working it until you got something a little more solid.
Are you talking about the whoops, or are you talking about the light?
Well, the light. Well, the whoops are pretty good, but then I mean, like, I don't know. I'd have to go over the details with you, but there's a lot of things people say it's and when people listen, it's like, well, okay, nothing was really seen, nothing was picked up on thermal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's more negatives than positives.
Oh yeah, there's absolutely way more negatives than positives.
Right.
But I want to share with the audience what happened. I mean,
that's good though. Yeah.
As far as the light goes, I honestly think it was something separate going on. And if I were to guess, I'd say it was a person. Was it an odd place for a person to be? Absolutely. Was it, could it have been a car reflecting light? I really don't think so. A person's about the only thing that really makes sense.
Maybe it was somebody with a headlamp or even a small flashlight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could the light have been a chemical glow stick?
I don't think so.
I think it was a I still think it was a headlamp. It looked like a headlamp. Like, it didn't look weird. It just was a weird place for it and a weird time. That's all. But it's not impossible at all that it was a person. Not at all.
Yeah, I don't think that was really Sasquatch related. I think it was just kind of a weird thing that happened when we were out there. But I don't tie that into being Sasquatch related one bit. I really don't.
No.
I think it was just something separate that happened while we were out there. Now, as far as the whoops we heard with regard to the crying baby, I absolutely think that was Sasquatch related.
Yeah, that was cool. I wish you were I do wish you were there for that, Will, just to hear that, because I really think you would have liked that. That was impressive.
What was weird about the whoops is it threw us all off because it happened so quick, and it came on us so quick. I mean, it literally came upon us really, really quick. And it seemed like its focus was on that sound. It was trying to get closer and closer to that sound. As soon as I started playing the second baby crying, what's kind of interesting to note is I think I'm kind of sure I got a cougar on thermal on the recording, kind of coming in and checking out that sound as well.
Yeah, more likely.
Yeah.
Well, I want to welcome our first witness to the show. His name is Rick, and he's going to tell us about his encounter when he had this creature looking at him through a window. But I wanted to welcome Rick to the show.
I guess that you had a couple of encounters that you sent us. So what I'd like to do is just have you lead us through those situations, start at the beginning, and just tell us what you were doing, prior to that first encounter, and walk us through the event.
Well, I guess the very first encounter was when I was followed or something was paralleling me in the woods. And I was down in Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. My father's side of the family are a bunch of hillbillies. They live up in the holler and all that kind of stuff. My grandmother, we call her Granny. prior to living in this house where this happened, she lives in an old cabin, no running water. We'd walk down the hill, down the side of the hill, across the road to the dairy to bring water back to take baths and that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of environment this is, really out in the sticks. So she moved into this other house when I was about 11, 12 years old. It actually had running water, but, coal burning stove and all that. So it was, a step up, but not exactly, 20th century. So me and my sister used to go down there and visit with Granny every summer. We'd stay the whole summer from about when I was 11 until the last year I was there was when I was 15. So this one year I was bored, so I decided to take a walk through the woods. And I walked a couple of miles down the side of the mountain through the woods, like up on the side of the mountain and down along the creek road, went past where Granny used to live and on down and that kind of thing. But while I was walking, this little dog that Granny had was walking along with me. They used to follow me around everywhere I went. I don't know, just guessing, probably a half a mile from the house through the woods. I kept hearing these cracks, and, sticks cracking and stuff around me. Now, I was 13. I had no idea. I'm thinking. I grew up in Boston. We only spent the summers down there at Granny's. So I was pretty much a city kid, had some exposure to the country, just living down there for the summer times and that kind of thing. So I wasn't quite strictly city, but, I didn't really understand the sounds of the forest that much or the woods. And so I was hearing cracks, sticks cracking and that kind of thing. And I'm figuring, well, it's probably a squirrel up there stepping on a branch or whatever it is. Well, the dog was like walking around in front of me, and it kept stopping and looking back and to the side, to my right side. And I would turn around and look because it was obvious the dog was seeing something. And I'd look around and there would be nothing there. And then I'd walk on, and then I kept hearing these cracks, sticks cracking and leaves rustling and that kind of stuff off to my side and behind me. And I'm thinking, well, it's probably deer, because there were a lot of deer around there and black bears. So I figured it was probably some animal, something like that, just walking around up there. But my family had always told me, black bears, they won't come near you. They're more scared of us than we are of them and that kind of thing. So I wasn't too concerned about a black bear coming near me. I figured I'd know it way ahead of time, and too nervous about it. And that summer there was black bears that were coming down off the mountain, and they were going through people's trash and stuff. So I knew they had been in the area. And I figured that's what it was. There's some black bear wandering around out there. And since I couldn't see it, it probably doesn't even know I'm there. It's just walking around doing its thing, and I'm doing my thing. No big deal. So I walked along, and then he kept hearing these sounds for, I don't know, half a mile. But nothing really eventful ever happened. It was just, in hindsight, looking back, I know that probably isn't what it was. It was probably this Sasquatch, because about maybe 2-3 weeks later, well, probably 2 weeks, it was pretty close to the end of the summer, me and my cousins were sitting around the table. Oh, well, let me back up. Before that happened, that little dog that was walking around with me, I found it squished in the mud back by the barn. Well, where this was it was kind of back in a holler. This house that she was living in, you wouldn't even know it was there. But there was this house, a barn, a smokehouse, a hog pen. She raised chickens and hogs. She didn't have any cows or anything, just chickens and hogs. But you wouldn't even know it was there because it was like back in the holler and kind of partially up the side of the mountain. In order to get there, you had to drive like through these trees, and you just plowed your car through the trees to get to the house. And the branches would scrape along the side of the car and everything. I mean, that's where it was. It was way up on the hillside. So we were kind of isolated back there. If you look at Google Earth now, somebody had put a field out there, and it's not quite as densely forested around the house anymore, but the house and the barn is still there. But there was this barn out behind the house that was even farther back, but it was maybe 100 yards back from the house, maybe 200 tops. And I was out wandering around one day, and I walked back by the barn, so I was always curious about the barn. But we never really went back there because you get out there and it starts smelling really funny. It smelled like there was dead stuff back there or something. So I never went back there because it was, trying to make your stomach turn. I went back there one day. I said, well, I'm going to go back there and see what the heck's going on back here in this barn. And I got back by the barn. I walked around on the barn, and it was full of like old, waterlogged hay that had been put up in there. Not like huge piles of it, but just a little bit left over that had been put up in there and left for years. It turns kind of grayish and gets all kind of moldy and that kind of thing. So I figured, well, that's probably where the smell's been coming from. And as I was walking out, I was just walking around, and I found that little dog that was walking with me had been missing for a while. And it had it's not really a maggot. I guess it kind of is. There's this kind of fly that will land on cows and horses, and it'll lay an egg on them, just a single egg. And that egg will bore its way into their skin. And it's just one maggot will grow out of it. I forget what kind of fly it is. Well, this dog, one of them had landed on it, and it was in its neck. So I spent like several days trying to pull the thing out of its neck because, it would poke its head out, you grab it with a pin. But I wasn't strong enough to get it out of there. So when the dog disappeared, we thought, well, it just went off and died. That maggot finally got to its, its artery or whatever in its neck. Well, when I was coming out of the barn, I was walking in, I found the dog, and, it had maggots on it. And I was like, well, there's the dog, it died. And then I was looking at it, and I grabbed a stick, and it was squished down into the mud, like squished flat. Its entire body was flattened out. It looked like it got run over by a truck. And I couldn't figure it out. Why, how in the hell, because she doesn't have cows. There's nothing back there that would have been heavy enough to squish this dog into the mud. And it rained, maybe just the rain, it sunk that far. And then I pulled it up, and it was actually flat. Its skull had been flattened, like it had been stepped on by it. Yeah. But, I was 13. I'm like, I have no idea.
Sure.
And it was in kind of off to the side where the grass was starting to grow, because there was like a muddy area that led up to the barn that had some, weeds growing. But you know how an old road that had been used a lot, you get the grass that grows in the middle and then some that grows along the tracks if nobody drives along it for a while? It was kind of like that. And then it got thicker off to the side. Well, that dog was like right on the edge of where the thick grass and weeds started. And it looked like it was in a flat spot. Now, I never looked. And I think this is honestly part of the problem with people finding stuff. Because when you're not looking for it, you don't see it. Because I wasn't looking to see if it was a big footprint. But that's what I think happened, is that the Sasquatch stepped on the dog. Because I remember it was a big flat area, and the dog was squished right down into it. When I pulled him up out of there, I could see that it was squished into there pretty good. I couldn't figure it out. But I wasn't looking to see if it was in a big footprint. I just know it was like a flat area around there. It looked like it got run over by a tire or something. It was like just flat. Anyway, that was the second thing that happened, was finding the dog. The same dog that was with me that kept alerting me to something following me through the woods is the dog I found flattened out by the barn that smelled rancid all the time, which in hindsight I suspect that Bigfoot was hanging out in there. But then about, a week or so later, my mom came back down from Boston to pick us up, me and my sister. Well, the night that they got there, the adults were all in the living room, yucking it up, talking. And me and my cousins were sitting in the kitchen, and we were yucking it up back there, talking about funny crap that happened over the summer and that kind of thing. And I was sitting at the kitchen table, which was like up against the wall, the back wall of the house. And this is an old farmhouse, and I don't know if you'll understand what I'm saying here, but it had like one of those half windows that's like up towards the ceiling.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about? It's like you have a double sash window, and then some of the old farmhouses, they have this, it's almost like it's just the top half. And it was up towards the top above the kitchen table. My cousin Teresa was sitting to my right. My cousin Curtis was sitting to my left. And my sister was sitting there, too, on my left. Well, we were sitting there talking, and I kind of sat back in my chair and started laughing at something my cousin Teresa said. And I looked up at the window, and I saw two white spots in the window. And I was like, and I looked back down, and I looked back up real quick because it suddenly registered with me that I could see the reflection of the light that was above me in part of the window. But then I was seeing these two other things, which, you know, just as a quick glance, I thought was a reflection of something else behind me. And I'm like, well, there's nothing behind me. And I turned around and looked on the wall behind me, and there was nothing there. There was just a stove was behind me. And I think Granny had some, you know, one of those flowery plates or something hanging on the wall, but that was it. So I look back at the window, and I can't figure out what these two white spots are. So I sat there and I'm staring at it, and I was a weird kid. I always tried to figure out crazy stuff, you know, like how stuff worked. Why is it this? Why am I seeing this weird reflection in this window? And then there was a full moon that night, and I realized, well, I looked like to the left side of the window, and I realized I could see the trees outside, and I could see the top of the smokehouse, and I followed it along over towards the white shiny spots, and I saw the outline of like a fur hat. You know those hats. I always call them Cossack hats. Those big furry hats that the Russians wear.
Right.
That's what I thought I was seeing. I thought I was seeing that. They looked just like the outline of one of those big hats. I'm like, oh wait a minute. I mean, there's somebody there, and I looked real close. Now the reason. They continued their conversation and talking while I was doing all of this. Once I realized that it was a hat, or what I thought was a hat, which was crazy because this was August, and it was like, it would be like 87 degrees. It was a really hot night. And I couldn't figure out who in the hell would be wearing a fur hat. And I looked over at the two white spots, and I said, well, those are eyes. That's why. It's not a reflection. It's somebody standing there on the other side of the window. So I started looking real close. I figured they must be standing back to where the light inside the room isn't shining on them. So I started looking really close, waiting for my eyes to adjust for the darkness on the other side of the window. And then my eyes started to adjust to the darkness on the other side of the window. It just all of a sudden hit me. I said, well, no wonder I can't see anyone's face because they're not white. They're black. I mean, I'm not trying to be racist or anything, but this is the mountains. These are hillbillies. There are no black people there, or at least back then there were no black people. You know, the nearest black people were 100 miles away from there. So I'm getting a little freaked out because I'm from Boston, and you know, I went through the whole busing and all that stuff when I was a kid, and I had gone through it just a couple of years before this happened, actually. So, and my dad was in the Army. I had my friends were black. You know, black people went to school with me and all that stuff. So I knew what black people looked like. And I only say that because everyone else in the house didn't. The only black people, there were everyone else in the house, because this is what the kind of hillbillies they are, was they might have seen black people on TV, and that's it. You know, they've never actually seen a real person. So I'm looking, I'm like, well, this is some black person. So now, and I realized that just as I was about, I'm like, well, that's got to be Carl, my Uncle Carl, who's fixing to scare the hell out of us. So I was about to yell, you know, Carl, what are you wearing the fur hat for? It's hot as hell out. And then that's when I realized it was a black person, or what I thought was a black person. Just as I was about to say that, and I realized what I was looking at, because I saw, have you ever seen Sling Blade?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know that expression Billy Bob Thornton gets on his face, where he draws his lips way back, and he looks like he's all, you know, crazy dude. That is the look that this person, I thought, had on his face. His mouth was drawn way back, you know, and his lips were really fine. And I was like, what? I said, well, if this is a black person, this is a Looney Tune. Because he's got this weird grin on his face. He's looking at my cousin Teresa. And he had this, the way his eyes were, because the window was above us. He was looking down at my cousin Teresa sitting in the chair, and his eyes looked huge, like really bugged out. And then between the mouth and the bugged out eyes, I was like, oh my God, we got some kind of crazy dude outside the house. So I was just about to say, what the hell are you doing out? Like, get out of here, you nutbag, and, you know, something like that. And it looked at me. Just the eyes. Its eyes darted over towards me. I don't know if my cousin Teresa looked at me or what, because I was too busy looking at it. And its eyes looked over at me. And when it did, as soon as it did that, I realized this is not a person. This is an animal. Because have you ever seen, I'm sure you have, if you, a dog is trying to protect a bone or something, and they'll look at you like out of the corner of their eyes, and then their head will slowly, very slowly start turning towards you. It's almost like it's a weird way that an animal does that. That's what it did. And as soon as it did that, it started slowly turning its head towards me. I was like, well, it knows I'm looking at it. It's looking at me, and it's doing what my dog does. You know, that's not a person. And then I could see the texture of its face. What I realized after I stared at it for a minute and my eyes really adjusted was that I was actually seeing its face. It's just its face was so dark that when I was looking originally, I was looking for a white person standing there. So it wasn't connecting in my head until I realized it was a black person. And the way I realized that, I skipped over that part, is that when it was staring at Teresa, and I saw that big grin on its face, I saw its nose. And its nose it was more of a, it instantly reminded me of the TV show Good Times. The guy who played the father, he had this really flared nostril, like just huge. He also played the gay lover of Charlie's girlfriend's father but I've got a picture of him if you want to see what I'm talking about, if you don't know who I'm talking about. But his nose was really, really flared, like huge. That's what it had, and that's where I was like, this isn't a white, this is a black person. And then as soon as I saw that, my eyes adjusted to looking for a black face. Then all of a sudden I could see his entire face. And that's when it looked at me. So when it looked at me, I started looking at the rest of his face. Because I was like, well, it's acting like an animal, but no animal looks like a person. Because at the time, I had seen, In Search of Bigfoot and all of that crap when I was a kid. As far as I knew, it was in the Pacific Northwest. It was over in Washington State. It was one, there was only one of them, and it wandered around out there. That's what I knew. And so I completely disregarded it. Years had gone by before this happened. So it never even occurred to me when I was looking at this. I had no clue what I was seeing. And I just knew it wasn't a person because I've seen many, many black people. This was not a black guy, but a really strange black guy. So as I looked at the rest of its face, I could see. Now, when I was a kid, I had this thing where I used to love to draw monkeys, gorillas, chimpanzees, and all that stuff. Monkeys, skulls, that kind of stuff. When I was not much younger than when this happened, but around that time. So I was very familiar with what the features of a monkey were. And the first thing come to me was, this is a monkey. Well, it can't be a monkey because he has a nose. And then I started looking at the rest of the face, and there's a feature that I've never heard I've heard one person on your show describe this feature. Other than that, nobody has ever mentioned it. And that's the texture of the face. It's like leather. It's not like a person's face. It's like leather, and you could see the lines going up and down instead of like crow's feet and that. You can see the coming off of the cheeks. Stop me if you know what I'm saying. But the lines that would run up and down the face were deep leathery looking lines, and you could actually see the sheen on right where the skin would where the grooves were in the skin. And I was like, well, that's a monkey. And I looked at its mouth, and its upper lip was really, really long. And I could see the lines, those little faint lines that go up and down on a monkey. They go from like their nose down to the top of their lip.
Right.
I could see that on this thing. I didn't see any other fur because it was too dark, I think. I could see the outline of its head, and its head was so big in the window that all I could see was from about the top of its brow to just below its bottom lip, and I couldn't see the rest of its head. So that picture I sent you is actually my interpretation of the rest of it, based on where the fur outline was and all that stuff. But so I have no idea about the chin and that, but this is what I did see: is the texture of the face, the lines on the lips, the very thin lips that are almost like just a line that goes straight across. And the other part of it that wasn't really monkey-like, the mouth was pushed back. It wasn't quite as protruding as like an ape. You know how they don't have that domed look. It did slightly, because when it had its head turned sideways, looking towards my cousin, I could see the mouth going around and way back. So it did slightly have it, but so do we. You know what I mean? But it was a little more than us. But it wasn't anything like a gorilla or a chimp or anything like that. It was pushed much farther back. And I think that's why it had a nose. If you just take the mouth of a monkey and shove it back and leave the nose as is, the little part that connects, that pushes back, you would get the same shaped nose with big flared nostrils. And that's basically what it was, you know. So after I stared at it for a minute, and it was really enthused at listening to my cousin Teresa, it appeared. It was really taken with her. Because, I mean, the whole time I was staring at it, it never realized I was looking at it until, finally its eyes darted over to me. And I've heard this before. They're big into kids, like prepubescent, that kind of area. I think the sound of a female voice that age draws them. Because this thing was just, it was hanging on everything she was saying. Until, of course, it saw me. But anyway, then I was staring at it. We stared at each other for a minute, and it wasn't moving. And I was like, well, in addition to everything else, I realized it looks like a monkey, but it's not a monkey. It's not. I know it's not a black guy, unless he's really deformed. There's something wrong with him. And I said, I'm thinking in my head, well, it's possible because he had that weird grin on his face. Maybe this is just some escaped lunatic who was born with some kind of weird, birth defect or something. It looks like this, And then I realized, well, he's not moving. It was like it was trying to stay perfectly still. Like it knew I saw it, but it thought if it stayed still, I couldn't see it anymore. That was the thought that went through my head the way it was. Because its eyes darted over and its head slowly started turning. And I don't think it really, like a dog, I don't think it realized that its head was turning. And because it was turning so slow, it's almost imperceptible. And I think it was trying to stay still, thinking I couldn't see it. Well, once it did that, and I suddenly went, this is an animal, and this is creepy. It just scared the hell out of me, and I ran. I mean, I don't think I've ever ran so fast. I just jumped. The chair went flying across the room, and I went in the other room. And my cousins and my sister followed right behind me. And I said, did you all just see that? They said, no, we ran because you ran. So, and then my mom and Granny go, what in the hell is wrong with you? What are you doing? And I said, there's a weird looking, and I didn't want to say, because I thought, well, they're going to think I'm nuts if I say a kind of a gorilla thing in the window. So I said, this really weird looking black guy looking in the window in the kitchen. And my Granny starts laughing. And she says, black guy? She said, there ain't no black people for hundreds of miles around here. And I'm like, well, all I'm telling you is what I just saw in that window. And my Uncle Mike, who's only 3 years older than me, he goes and grabs, in hindsight, this is pretty funny, he goes and gets his .22. And we go out the back door. I go out with him. We go out the back door looking for this thing. And evidently, when I ran one way, it ran the other. So we go, as I'm trying to explain this to them, my grandmother's friend comes up, but you could hear him come up on the porch, and he comes in the house. Now, my grandmother, she automatically assumes that it was him looking in the window at us. And I'm like, well, I got a good look at this guy. That was not him, because I've known this guy since I was like 5. It wasn't him. And not only that, the guy could not have made it around the house. He was like 85 years old. He could not have made it around the house fast enough to get back in the front door. She goes, what are you scaring these kids for? He goes, what the hell are you talking about? He goes, what were you looking in the window out there for? He goes, I wasn't looking in the window. He says, but I heard something tearing ass up the side of the mountain. So me and my Uncle Mike go up the back, and the woods were 5 steps from the back door. You could actually just, because the kitchen was like almost like an add-on to it was like an old farmhouse that people kept adding rooms to. So the kitchen was just like an add-on to the back of the house. And the door was on the side. And when you walked out the door, you'd walk about 5 steps, and the mountain really started right at the base of the door. It started going up. So you'd take about 5 steps and you'd be in the woods. So we walked out there, and we're standing out behind the door, and we could hear something rustling around in the trees. So my Uncle Mike goes hauling butt up into the trees after it. I'm going to shoot your ass and all that stuff. And then I don't hear anything. I'm like, Mike, and he doesn't say anything. He goes, well, I chased something back up in there. He says, I think it was a buck. It was just pounding up the side of the mountain. And that was the end of that experience. They didn't believe me that it was, of course I didn't describe exactly, but also my grandmother, chickens were constantly going missing. She had these 2 huge hogs. Nothing ever happened to them, but they had to weigh 600-800 pounds. They were massive, the biggest hogs I've ever seen in my life. Nothing ever happened to them, but when the chickens would go missing, we would find chickens with their heads tore off, and we'd find them all over the place. We'd find them out by the woods, back by the barn, and I would say, Granny, what the hell's wrong with, why are these chickens doesn't have a head? She said, well, the hogs bite the heads off when they come near them, eat their food. And the hogs just bite their heads off, and then they run around because they're not dead yet. I'm like, oh, okay. But there was also chickens that went missing. There was one chicken that I used to call, my southern name, my middle name is App. It means son of. So down there, that's what everyone calls me. And so they called this one chicken Little App because I liked this one little chicken because of its color. It was a really cinnamon color instead of a regular chicken color, and I really liked it. It went missing one day, and I asked Granny, well, where's that? I thought we ate it the night before or something. And I said, well, where's, Little App? And she goes, well, I don't know. She goes, he's, maybe he got ate by a hog or something. And she said, chickens going missing all the time around here. But I think the hogs are eating. So, in hindsight, I think maybe the Sasquatch was helping himself.
Going back to the window incident, how far up is that window?
I was about 5'4" at the time. So that window, the bottom of it was about maybe to my chin. So it was probably from bottom to top, maybe 6 foot to the top, and about 4.5 foot or something like that at the bottom. Something like that.
And then you're talking probably a couple more feet between the floor and the ground, right?
Yeah, I mean, the ground outside was a little bit higher than the floor inside, because like I said, the mountain came right down to the house back there. Really not mountain. I think from years and years of rain, and there's a lot of clay there, that the clay had slid a little bit. So, but no more than, from an average house, probably no more than 6 inches to a foot higher than the foundation kind of thing. So whatever it was, it had to be squatting back there. It wasn't actually looking in the window standing. It had to be kind of crouched down looking in the window. I mean, it's assuming it was a Sasquatch.
Right.
But if I was standing back there, right now I'm 6'4". If I was standing back there, I would probably have to hunker my head down a little bit, and the top of my head would be touching the eave, and the top of the window was right there. It wasn't like code construction, if you know what I mean. It was, let's put a window here, and they put a window there. So the top of the window was probably about 6 foot up. Bottom was, I don't know, 4.5 feet.
When you saw the face, would you describe it as kind of a Down syndrome type look?
I've known a few people with Down syndrome. I don't think I would. I mean, I guess in a way you could say that, because it was just it was like a goofy look. You know what I mean? Because I'm talking about Billy Bob Thornton and that whole,
right,
grin he had
right.
going. But as far as the eyes, like being, they're kind of almond shape or slanty, almost like they're half Asian. Most Down syndrome people, but to me, that's the way they strike me. I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say the eyes were like that. No, I guess not. I would, it looks, the only difference in the picture I sent you from what I've seen is the nose. And that's because I couldn't get it right. And I would rather have it look more human than ape-like because I didn't want to represent it as just being like a monkey look.
Take a look at Australian Aborigine photos. A lot of folks will describe the nose like theirs.
But are they those real thin, high-nostriled kind of noses?
More wider, kind of flat.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, yeah. The nose doesn't stick out very far.
Right.
As far as the tip of it.
I sent you a picture a few minutes ago, so when you get a chance, take a look and see what you think about that.
Okay. But Down syndrome, I don't think so. I would say it's more, it looked like a monkey. It looked like a monkey with a nose and the mouth was mashed back. That's what it looked like to me.
When you were describing, when you first saw it, looking at your cousin Teresa, and its eyes were bugging out, and what you described as a grin, when it finally looked over at you, did the facial expression change at all?
No, But when it slowly turned its head towards me, its mouth disappeared below the bottom of the window.
Okay.
So, but when its eyes started towards me, I could still see its mouth. I did not see any change whatsoever, except that its eyes were looking at me now, and its head started to slowly turn towards me. Other than that, the face didn't change at all. It didn't show its teeth or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't growl, which, thinking back, with all the other stories I've heard, on your guys' show and everything, yeah, I'm kind of surprised. But I'm thinking, because when I think back about what it looked like in the descriptions and some of the artist renderings I've seen, although I don't know how accurate they would really be, most of the people that I've heard that have seen these things and try to describe them have seen them from, 20, 30 feet away. And I think if this thing was standing 20, 30 feet away from me in the dark, I wouldn't see the details that I saw. The reason I saw the detail I did was because the light was shining right on its face. See, that's the other thing. Their skin kind of absorbs light, except where we have this cat. The Halloween cats, the black cats. They usually have the arch back and all that stuff.
Right.
Well, we have one of those, and I forget what the heck the breed is, but they're actually not black. They're brown. And you can't tell that they're brown until the light hits them a certain way. And then when you see the brown, you're like, wow, that cat really is brown. And you can't believe that they look so black when you see the brown, because they're really brown. But because of the way their fur is, it refracts the light in a certain way that makes them appear black. And when our cat gets out at night, you can't even find him, because you can actually look at right where he is. And even though you can see the shadows, you can't see him, because he's more of a void than he is a shadow or a dark object. You know what I'm saying? There's a subtle difference. He's more of like an absence of light in that spot rather than a shadowed area. And I think that's what
that's a very good description. It made me think about the two that I encountered when I was 16 at about 15 feet away, and it was starting to get dark, so that's a great way to put it, where the skin sort of absorbed the light, because now granted it was a fairly quick encounter, and I was kind of scared, at the time, but I didn't really notice a lot of the facial detail. I did see the eyes. I focused on that. And I think because of the lack of light under those circumstances probably obscured those details.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem that some people have with their descriptions, and that's part of the problem with getting a good description of them, is that once the light starts to become less and less, their skin becomes darker, an order of magnitude. You know, it's like what do you call it? Exponentially becomes darker because they're actually refracting or whatever.
They start becoming a shadow, basically.
Yeah, or a void of light. Because I did CG. I did some CG work way back, you know, in the 90s before I started with this peripheral neuropathy crap. And there's this thing called subsurface scattering that you do when you're doing a CG creature. And what it is that most skin has actually multiple layers of color. And there's this calculation that you can add to a surface that's called subsurface scattering, and you can pick, you know, the colors and so forth and that. And what it does is it adds kind of like a refractor index to the surface, and it changes the way that it looks based with light hitting it. And that's what I think is going on with the Sasquatch, is that their skin, the pigmentation in their skin does some kind of strange subsurface scattering, where when the light is hitting it, it actually reduces the amount of reflection that's coming back off of it.
It's almost like a natural camouflage at certain times of the day.
Somewhat, yeah. Somewhat at night, absolutely. At night, they would appear to just be a silhouette cut out in the environment. That's the way it would look.
Which is their primary feeding time, by the way.
That's just an observation I made, because when I saw this thing, once I realized what I was looking at, and I could plainly see it, once I adjusted my eyes to see what I was seeing, that's exactly the quality that I noticed. I was like, the light's shining right on this thing, and yet it's really difficult for me to see it looking in the window. Mm-hmm. You know, because it had its face close to the window, you know, so the light was shining right on it, but the only reflection I could see was, like I said, in those crags that were running up and down its face. And that reminded me of, if you've ever seen a gorilla, like footage of a gorilla or whatever, when they have that black face and the sunlight comes off like a shine on where the wrinkles are on their face. It was just like that. And I'm like, that's the only place I can see. If it wasn't for that, it would look like a complete void right there.
Yeah, you're picking up that 3D detail there.
Yeah, and that's the only way I could make out its face, because it was just crazy the way it would. The light didn't even seem to affect its skin at all.
That's probably one of the most interesting details I think I've ever heard about the light and skin.
Great account.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear your White Mountain incident.
It's more of a looking back at it. I know that's what it was, kind of thing. But we had gone up camping in the White Mountains up the Kangamangas Highway. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's like 200 miles of road. There's a sign that says 250 miles to the next gas station. So it's this big long road that goes up and down the White Mountains. And we had gone up there, and I was 18. We were all 18, so we were on a road trip. We threw a tent in the trunk, and we're going to go on a road trip. We started out in Massachusetts, and we ended up in New Hampshire because we wanted to go camping, and everywhere we went to, the campground was full. So we said, oh, well, there's campgrounds in New Hampshire. So we went up there. This is where we ended up, which was quite the road trip. So we ended up, we're going down along this mountain. We're looking, well, there's got to be campgrounds here because this is the mountains and this is, you know, a mountain highway. We were driving forever and did not run across a campground. And we started running low on gas. And my friend in the back seat, he goes, well, that sign back there said like 250 miles or 200 miles, whatever it was, to the next gas station. I'm like, well, we've got just under a quarter of a tank. I don't think we're going to make it. So we're going, and we passed this Alcoa. Is that what they're called? Campsite? Or Koa, K-O-A, something, campsite. So we pull in there, and it's full. Yeah, is it K-O-H? Whatever it is, you know what I mean. And we pull in there, and it's full. And we're like, well, what the hell? We can't go any farther because, you know, it's like 2 a.m. We've got no gas. The next gas station is God knows how long because we weren't keeping track of the miles from the time we passed that sign, so we didn't know how close we were. So they had this spigot and this patch of grass around the water spigot. So we pitched our tent there. We get the tent off. I mean, literally, we finally put the last stake in, and this park ranger pulls it. And he says, you can't camp there. Like, well, we have to. We have no gas. We have to, we can't keep going. We'll be, sitting in the car. And he says, well, I'll tell you what. He says, I know 2 private hunting camp areas that people use when they go hunting. He says, I'll tell you how to get to one of them, and you can camp there and go get you some gas in the morning. Oh, cool. So he tells us, go down here, you're going to take a left, and when you see he says, the trees will be real thick, and you'll see this thin spot. He said, when you see this thin spot, you're going to pull off the road. He said, there's not going to be a road there, but just pull off and drive up into the trees. He said, and then you keep on going up in them trees until you get to this split in the road. If you can call it a road, it's more of where the trees are thinner. And you want to go to the right and go all the way up there. And at the end of that, there'll be a clearing, and you can camp there. So we're like, okay. So we go down there, and it turns out this, it was probably 3 or 4 miles or something like that from the campground. But it was just as far up the side of this mountain, this road went. So we were way up the side, and we were going up at a pretty good angle all the way up the side of this mountain. We finally got up to the clearing, and we start pitching our tent. And the car was parked in the little thin part of the trees, which you would call the road, and right at the edge of the clearing. And we pitched the tent right in front of the car. This is just stupidity at its most. We put the tent right in front of the car. We kept the lights on while we were putting up the tent and everything. Got us a fire going. Well, actually, we went out for firewood. Me, my friend Rob, and my friend Andy. They've never been out of the city. They've never been camping. This was their first camping trip ever. They've never been out of the city. So, I said, well, we need to go get some wood. Just go out there and find some, broken branches or whatever, some dead wood, and we'll come back and build a fire. So I walk off to the far end of the clearing. My friend Rob starts going off to the left, and our friend Andy, he was staying behind to finish unpacking the cooler and stuff, I guess. So I go off into the woods. I probably go maybe 50 yards out, and I find this dry creek bed that's coming down from up the mountain. And it's probably 20-foot drop to the bottom of the creek bed. So I climbed down the bank of the creek bed I needed to take a whiz. So I'm standing there, and I hear somebody walking around up on the bank up at the top. And I'm like, what are you doing, Rob? Because I figured it was him. And I look up, and I see somebody walk behind a tree. And I go, Rob, I saw you. Don't be trying to scare me, dude. You're not going to scare me, And at the time, I was thinking, well, this is awful, ballsy of Rob, since he's scared to death out here, to be out here, trying to scare me. And so I picked up some wood, and I'm like, Rob. And he didn't say anything. So I climbed back up to the bank, and I'm looking around for him, and I didn't see him. So, well, I don't know. Maybe I saw him just a second ago. Back over to the campground. I go over, put the wood down. I go, well, how the heck did you beat me back here? Because Rob was already there. And I figured he was still hiding behind a tree over by that creek bed, because he didn't want me to see him. So he says, I never went out there. He says, I'm not going out there, dude. He says, I got these, and he got what amounted to kindling that he had picked up along the very edge of the clearing because he didn't want to walk out in the woods. He said, I'm not going out in the woods. I heard some noises, some stuff out there. He says, there's some kind of animal, there's mountain lions out there or something. I said, they're more scared of you than you are. I'm repeating what my family told me in Virginia. I'm thinking, well, there's black bears, there's probably mountain lions and wolves, but they're not going to come near us. We got the campfire going now, we're okay. So we're sitting there. We start toasting hot dogs, and we keep hearing these sticks breaking out around the edge of the clearing. And my friends are going, Richie, dude, something's out there. And I'm like, no, don't worry about it. It's probably a raccoon. And in my head, I'm trying not to get them freaked out. But in my head, I'm going, that was a pretty substantial raccoon. So now I'm thinking, oh, there are brown bears up here? And I'm thinking maybe because that sounded like bigger than a black bear. you know, I'm thinking, well, you know, the brown bears, and this is what's going through my head. And I'm like, well, the safest thing we can do is stay here by the fire, keep the fire going. So we keep hearing these noises all around the campsite. And some of them got pretty loud and substantial. And my friends are freaking out. They like crawled back in the tent, you know, they're with just their heads peeking out. It was just a little tent. I mean, all three of us slept in it, but I think it's like a 1 or 2 man tent. It was a really small thing. And they're back in there looking out, and I'm like, what the hell are you guys doing, you chicken shit? I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys are adult rated or not. But so I'm sitting by the fire, and we're hearing these branches crack and stuff. That's really all it amounted to is we were hearing branches crack, but we kept hearing, like I would hear them on the left side, and then I'd hear them on the right side, and I'd hear them on the other side. So it was, you know, in my head, I'm trying to keep track. I'm like, well, I like had this big piece of wood next to me in case something come charging out of the woods at us. I was going to beat it off, you know, beat it back, excuse me. And, it didn't sound good, did it? So, but at the same time, I'm trying to keep my composure because I didn't want them freaking out because that's all we needed, you know, is for them to be, because it would have been untenable at that point. So we, you know, I got the fire going really good, and I got in the tent, and I said, well, it's like 4 o'clock, the sun's going to come up here soon. We'll lay here, and, you know, everything will be all right as long as this fire's going. And we had the fire right in front of the tent, so nothing could have got to us without having to go past the fire. And I knew animals weren't going to do that. At least I thought so. You know, God knows what a Sasquatch will do. I've heard that they don't care about fire, but, you know, that was my thinking at the time. And still at this point, I'm not thinking Sasquatch at all. And so we got in there, we fell asleep. Next morning we wake up and we had left the headlights in the car on all night. So the battery was dead. And we had to coast the car down the side of the mountain through these trees to the highway and, you know, get a ride into town and that kind of thing. But that was the end of it. It was just you know, in hindsight, I knew it was more. I mean, I was thinking brown bear, you know, like a grizzly or Kodiak or something. I don't know if they're actually up there, but that's what I was thinking. This isn't a black bear. This isn't a mountain lion. You know, this is something bigger. So in hindsight, I know that's got to be what it was.
Yeah, interesting, especially since you thought it might have been a person hiding behind a tree.
Yeah, no, I saw him. I saw the outline of the guy who I thought was Rob, and I was looking up at him, you know, from the bottom of a creek bed, and the bank was a pretty steep bank too. It wasn't like, you know, you just walked your way down. It was like, you know, one of those you go sideways and your feet slide all the way down. It was pretty steep, and he was up at the top, and I saw a silhouette walk behind this big tree, and I'm like, oh, come on, Rob. You know, I turned around because I was, you know, handling my business there. And so when he stepped behind the tree, I just turned around. And so I don't know if it was even there when I went back up, because like I said, if they're a void of light, when I went back up there, if I'm looking for my friend Rob, he's wearing, you know, colored clothes and all that stuff, I wouldn't even have noticed it. And that's also what I mean by, unless you're looking for it, it would be easy to just, you know, your eyes scanning the trees. It could be 10 feet from you and you wouldn't even see it unless there was some kind of light shining on it. And these trees out here in the White Mountains, they were thick. I mean, it was probably a full moon and I could barely see the hand in front of my face. That's how thick it was. You could barely see the wood we were picking up in that. It was really hard to see anything. But because I was looking up at him and I could see some of the light coming down through the trees up in the sky, and that's the only way I saw the silhouette walk. And it was someone walking on 2 feet. You know, I thought it was my friend Rob, because I was looking up. I couldn't tell how tall he was or how far from the bank he was.
That's another great point you made about, you know, not just the coloring, but geometrically, the way these guys are designed. If they're standing still, they look just like the trees, because the lines are the same way, you know, vertical and not horizontal like a deer or something like that would be. So unless they're moving, our eyes probably oftentimes wouldn't catch one of these things.
Well, not only that, there's this thing. I've watched Finding Bigfoot. I know it's I'm always yelling at the TV at these idiots, but you have Renee. Renee is always saying, "Oh, well, I forget what the heck, pareidolia or something like that." Where, well, if you're looking at the tree, and the human mind automatically wants to see a face, and that's what happens. Right. Well, my argument with that is that the size of a Sasquatch is such that your mind would automatically be trying to create a person. And that's my argument, that when you're in the darkness, and like you just said, because their silhouette would make you think of a tree, because it's so huge. For one, it is so big that your mind would immediately cancel it out as being a person. Because you're looking
for a frame of reference, so you're not going to pay attention to that.
Right, you're going to go right past it because you're looking for a person. So, those are just the things that my observations and things from watching those shows. I think that they're way off. I think a lot more people see them or run across evidence than we know. And the reason that it doesn't get reported is because, like when I found the dog, it was probably a footprint, but I wasn't looking for a footprint that was 18 inches long. All I knew is I was looking at the dog, and it was one of those little poodles. He wasn't cut like a poodle, but he's probably 20 inches long himself, max. Right. So he was about the size of a Bigfoot print, and he had a flattened out mud area all the way around. So that's how big of a footprint it would have been. Well, I can't say towards his butt, but because I was only looking at his head, but his head and his torso the mud around him was flat. And that's all I remember. I wasn't looking for toes and all that, because you don't think of a foot being that big unless you're consciously looking for a Sasquatch footprint. Right. I think that a lot of people miss a lot of stuff because they're not looking for it, and to them their mind is immediately negating it as a footprint because it's not normal for them.
It really makes you wonder if your grandmother saw and heard more than she probably ever said.
Yeah, I wish I'd have thought about it and asked her. She passed away in '98. I wish I'd have thought about it back then to ask her. I mean, I could ask my cousins and stuff, but they probably wouldn't talk about it. Granny would have. Well, she would have, but she would have blew it off. Well, yeah, it's probably bears, something like that, unless she'd actually seen one. And then she probably still would have blew it off. She's like some of the people that you come on your show and say, oh, in this area, nobody would ever talk about it. It would kind of probably be like that. Granny probably wouldn't have talked, but she would have told me about incidents. She just wouldn't have said it's a Sasquatch, or anything like that. Right. But it would have been interesting to hear about any strange happenings, because she lived out there way back when, let me think, she was probably 98. She's lived out there since the early 1900s, like 1910 or something, 1920. So she was out there when they had just finished fighting the Indians and stuff.
She was familiar with boogers, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure, and probably some of the other people around there who are pretty much all gone now. They're my cousins left, but they've built not a lot. I mean, the place is still pretty primitive, but they've built it up quite a bit, cleared it out for farming and stuff. So it's not as easy to get into you can't just walk out the back door to get into the woods anymore.
I just want to say that for 2 weeks in a row, I have a disturbing image burned in my head. I mean, the grinning Bigfoot watching your cousin is just, wow.
Yeah, and the look, it's just, if you've seen Sling Blade, I mean, that was exact. It just had this really big, it was creepy.
Almost an evil look.
Yeah. Well, no, it was more simpleton. It was more, that's the only reason when he asked me about Down syndrome that I was kind of hung, because that's what was, when I first, that big grin, I wouldn't put it as a Down syndrome, but I would put somebody with some kind of a mental defect like that. Somebody who's a little, because it was the way he was looking at Teresa was like it was a very simpleton, crushy kind of thing. That's what it struck me at first. But that was when I thought it was a person. I was like, well, this is a creepy, strange person who evidently has the hots for Teresa. you know, until I realized that it wasn't a person. So I don't know. That's just probably just the way his face looks, you know. But that was that was the way it looked.
I just wanted to thank you for coming on the show and taking the time to share.
Oh yeah, sure. You know, everyone's always told me I'm crazy with a black person, but I just, it's not a black person. I mean, as far as the other episodes, they may or may not have been. They may have been a black bear, may have been a brown bear. I don't know. But looking through the window, that was, without a doubt in my head, Sasquatch.
Yeah, and what you described in terms of the skin texture and coloring and everything, we've heard that a number of times from other people actually that have seen them up close. So you're right in the spectrum where it should be.
Yeah. What about the ones that are supposedly, because there's supposed to be 4 species, I guess, or races, I guess? Well, is that matched?
That's what our government insider, Mr. Black, tells me, that there are 4 different types. I would say in that part of the country it's probably the type 2.
Is that the general description though? Because that patty, I actually took a picture. That picture I drew, and I put hair on its face similar to Patty. And it does kind of look like Patty. It really does. But not so much. As far as the artist rendition, though, because you really can't tell from that footage what the face really looks like. But the artist rendition, who I assume is somebody who's pretty talented and they know how to reconstruct and all of that, looks more like a person than what I saw. What I saw looked more like a monkey. Actually, your episode 54, your last episode, that guy who talked about the one with the dog, you know, he actually described it the way that I was trying to describe it when I was a kid. You know, it was kind of a strange, or what I had thought about anyway, it was a strange looking black guy monkey thing, you know, it wasn't, and he kind of described it very, very similar to what I did. I don't know where he was. I don't think he ever mentioned, but, you know. Anyway, well, yeah, it was great to be on the show. Great to get it off my chest. And the other thing I wanted to say before I forget is the thing about the eyes, not the red eyes, but I've explained to people that there are whites to their eyes because, you know, I told you that's what drew me to the window. But their eyes don't look, they have whites to their eyes, but it's more like if you've seen a Labrador. You know, and I kind of exaggerated the whites in that picture a little bit. I wanted to home the fact that they do have whites to their eye, but it's more like a lab. You know how they have whites to their eyes, but you can only barely see it around the edges. You know, unless or if they're looking to the side, you can see it. That's how this thing was. It wasn't like a person where we have these little tiny colored areas. They're larger, but they do have whites to their eyes. Yeah, because I've heard Kathy Strain or somebody, she was talking about seeing one in some place in Montana, and she said they don't have sclera. I'm like, yeah, they do. You know, so she's saying that they don't. Well, and then I thought about it. I said, well, if they look directly at you and they're at a distance, you might not see it, because, you know, like a lab, I think it kind of it's a little dark at the edges of the colored part of their eye, but there is white. You know, and if you're up close, you would probably see it.
The first 2 that I saw, I could see the white, but you're right, it wasn't a great deal, you know, but you could see it around the edges. Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're verifying.
Yeah. No, you're right on the money.
Well, I guess that is exactly what I saw. I knew too many, and it sounds so racist, but I knew too many black people growing up. I knew that's not what I was looking at. You know, it had to be. I just, at the time, I was like, I have no idea what the hell this thing is.
Well, you know, if you're looking at human or not.
Yeah, it's like, this is just creepy, whatever. You know, it's acting like an animal.
Right.
You know? So, yeah. Well, it was great talking to you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick. Sure appreciate it.
All right, you guys take it easy. Good talking to you.
The face story, that was awesome. That was great detail, and he told it very well.
It really creeped me out. That wasn't even like a play on words. That really creeped me out, his description.
Oh, I could tell you something that will creep you out even more. I was talking to Wes earlier, the guy we called Jack, our cop friend.
Yeah.
Told me a couple of really interesting pieces of information last night on the phone. One has to do with, we talked about, in other accounts, we've had witnesses talk about Sasquatches running alongside vehicles. And there's more to it than that. And Wes knows. It was, you had, and you'll have to edit this out because I can't remember her name, Brenda Harris on the show. And where she talked about children being snatched out of vehicles by these things. Well,
right.
Jack told me that he knew about this also through police circles, not just the back of pickups, but out of open windows. Our friend Mr. Black confirmed it. The government knew about this. It happened many, many times.
Oh, my God.
That's a pretty creepy aspect to this also. And the second thing he told me was, this is something in his area that's kind of quiet among law enforcement people. The animal control officers have had these things come and take roadkill out of their vehicles. It's one of those little dirty secrets they don't talk openly about, but, it's nice to know somebody on the inside to bring this information out. If there are more pieces to the puzzle coming out.
Yeah, when we had Brenda Harris on the show, she said that had happened a few times, and I guess like guys in black vans show up and take everyone's phone and basically silence them. If they speak, they're going to get cut off from government funding or the check every month. But
I was going to tell you guys too, while we were listening to Bart, I emailed our friend Mr. Black and I asked him. I said, well, my suspicion is while listening to this guy that there was a special forces team there without anyone knowing about it, trying to cover this stuff up. And he said, his response was, my friend I told you about was a group spy at Campbell, and that's close to Bart's area. Hint, hint. So he wants me to call him tomorrow. We're going to chat about this stuff. My suspicion, about special forces teams being around, covering this stuff up, you really kind of confirmed without saying so directly, at least at this point, that is what was happening. He said many in Bart's area saw the same thing. There was also these water-type creatures from a river that flows into the Ohio from the same drainage area. So we could talk a long time about this. And it's in the same gene pool as what's here. So I'll update everyone as I can and what he allows me to say. So very interesting stuff.